This is the Dutch Parliament in The Hague. There are 150 MPs, one of whom, my guest today, lives a life very different from all of the others. He has bodyguards, he lives in a series of safe houses. The reason? Well, he continues to wage what he's declared to be a jihad against Islam. He has an unerring eye for controversy, but is he winning the argument?
Geert Wilders, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you.
You are still hugely controversial. You still have the security detail, you sleep in the safe houses, but do you worry that the Dutch people are no longer listening to you?
Well, I'm not really worried by that, to be honest. We have 9 seats in our parliament today, and if you look at the latest polls, we even get 50% more, like 14 seats out of the 150-seated parliament, so almost 10%. So I believe that there is a growing amount of people, at least in my country, that support our ideas, and I'm very happy with that.
But you thrive on controversy. You thrive on provoking extreme reaction. And if we look at the film that you made earlier this year, Fitna, which in essence took the Quran, took the words from the Quran and conflated them with images of jihadi terror, and seemed to suggest the message was Islam equals terror. And yet that film flopped. It roused very little reaction.
Yes. Well, first, my aim is not to invoke violence in any way. This is not the reason I made Fitna. I made Fitna to show indeed to the Dutch and the West society that Islam as such is a threat, is a violent, barbaric ideology, and that Fitna, indeed, the film was a success. I believe it was a success. In the Netherlands, after 2 hours, more than 3 million people watched it. Worldwide, more than 20 million people watched it.
So well, you don't know how they reacted to it. I mean, many people in the press described it as utterly predictable. The message that you've been delivering for years has not changed, and now it seems Muslims are choosing to ignore it rather than react to it.
Well, this is fortunately, or unfortunately maybe, I don't know, not the case. There was a lot of reactions to the film Fitna, both in the Netherlands and abroad. There was a parliamentary debate with our Prime Minister a few days after Fitna. There was a debate in our society. Could be more, I agree with that, but still there is. And I get so many reactions also from abroad, 20 million people watched it, and my email box, more than 1,000 reactions a day. And
well, I'll tell you one reaction from abroad, a reaction of Mr. Vestergaard, the Danish cartoonist, whose image you reproduced in your film.
Yes.
That is the famous cartoon image of a depiction of Prophet Muhammad with a turban, a bomb on his head,
yes.
Apparently an allusion to terrorism. Mr. Vestergaard asked you to take that cartoon image out of your film. You had not got permission to use it, and he said your ideas about Islam and the dangers of Islam were absolutely contrary to his own, and you had to take the image out.
And I did. I indeed made a mistake by using, without asking, his cartoon. On the other hand, I met him a few weeks ago in Denmark to discuss the matter, and even though he doesn't agree and he doesn't share my view on Islam, he's very much in favor of the freedom of speech, and he even said that if you would have asked me, I would have made, especially for you, perhaps a new cartoon that you could use in your film.
Well, he may agree with the freedom of speech, but it is quite embarrassing for you, Mr. Wilders, is it not, when he says Wilders has an overly generalized perception of Muslims as potential terrorists. It is not like that at all, he says. I know a lot of Muslims here in Denmark who accept democracy completely and who live their religion as a private matter.
But there, I'm sorry to disappoint you, I don't disagree with Mr. Westergaard. I don't believe that the majority of the Muslims are terrorists. I make a distinction between the people. I don't hate people. I acknowledge the fact that the majority of the Muslims are not terrorists, but I have a problem with the violent ideology that is called Islam.
Let me quote you the words of a prominent Jewish television producer here in Holland, Harry de Winter. He said, You can find many sentences in my Torah that are violently abusive of homosexuals, women, non-Jewish preachers. But if the film, a film similar to Fitna, had been made about Jews, it would have been universally condemned as anti-Semitic. And he's right,
I don't know. He's fully wrong. There are so many differences between, on one side, Christianity, Judaism, and on the other side, Muslim. The religious context.
You can find words in the Bible, in the Torah, which appear to be incitements to violence, which incite hatred against apostates, against unbelievers, and if you chose to thread them together, as you do with particular words from the Quran, you could characterize both of those other religions as committed to violence, hate, and even terror.
Well, I believe that is complete nonsense indeed. Look, for instance, at the Old Testament that you mentioned, Christianity. It was followed by a more moderate New Testament. There has not been any new Quran so far. And what are the problems today? Besides perhaps some incidents in Israel and other countries,
Let's take a case study.
The majority of the terroristic and violent acts today, whether it is in London, whether it's in Madrid, in the streets of Amsterdam, or 9/11, is committed by people in the name of Islam, not by Buddhism or by Christianity or by Judaism.
But here we get to the question of interpretation and context and fairness. Let me just cite you one example. Yigal Amir, a Jew, a religious Jew who assassinated a Prime Minister, Yitzhak Rabin, he said that he did it inspired and guided by words from Jewish holy text. That does not give you, me, or anybody else the right to say that Judaism is a religion committed to terror, does it?
It's not the contrary. Judaism...
But you do the same with Islam.
Christianity is part of our culture. And of course there are individuals like Yigal Amir who did the most terrible thing. But it's not in the same context. If you look at the Quran, where, if you saw after the destruction of the Second Temple in the Judaism, you also saw it in Christianity, I'll talk about the New Testament, that you saw a change of enlightenment, you saw a change of attitude. You don't see that in Islam. If you look at the Islam from 1400 years ago, when those people declared war on our societies and our culture, you see almost no change. Why? Because Islam and the Quran is believed as the word of God.
I feel your passion. I hear it.
Yes.
And I also sense an incredible certitude from you, a belief that you are right. There is not a shred of self-doubt in you. How can you reach that level of certitude about Islam, your belief that you know what Islam is? I look at your record. You've spent an awful lot of time in the Middle East, but actually almost all of it's been in Israel. You've visited Israel.
That's not true.
Hang on, you've visited Israel more than 40 times. You've lived in Israel. Have you lived in Turkey? Have you lived amongst Muslims, let's say in Michigan in the United States, or amongst Muslims actually in your own country in the Netherlands, Muslims who are moderate, law-abiding, peaceable people living in a democracy and accepting the rules of a democracy? There are hundreds of millions of Muslims who you have apparently no knowledge of.
I do. I visited not only more than you think Arab and Islamic countries, like I stated before, not only my friends, indeed, though ask my friends, I'm not ashamed to say that, of Israel. So, and I spoke to many people, from the clergy to the intellectuals to even journalists I spoke to. And I acknowledge once again the fact that in our societies there are a majority of the Muslims that are in fact not terrorists. But I know that if the amount of them will grow and if their culture will become more dominant, that it will change. And that the concept of taqiyya that they are stating now, by not really saying and showing often who they are, will change if they become stronger. And I'm not the first one. Maybe I want to emphasize one thing, because you said, how can you be so sure? I want to tell you one thing, because you are a British journalist. I remember reading a book called The River War by Winston Churchill. It was published in 1899, and Winston Churchill at that time said very clearly that Mohammedanism is a militant faith and we may lose our civilization in Europe. And unfortunately what I see today, that we have a total lack of political leadership. The leaders in Europe and in the European countries are not behaving like Churchill. They are behaving like Chamberlain, selling out with the enemy, which is Islam, selling out our culture, our identity. And I'm a politician that stands up and says, enough is enough. Islam is not part of our culture, should never be. Islam is not part of our culture, should never be. and will never be.
But here is your problem, Geert Wilders. Muslims in your own country are wising up to your methods. You want to provoke a furious, angry reaction. You want them out on the streets burning your image, but they're not doing it anymore. I mean, let me quote to you the words in The Economist magazine of Fatima Arslan, who is a Dutch Muslim born in Turkey, and she says the imams told Muslims across the Netherlands that they should not rise up against fitna. Whatever the provocative nature of your message, they should appreciate they live in a democracy and that they too have a platform to tell Holland and the world how wrong you are in your portrayal of Islam.
Listen, once again, for the second time in this interview, I'm not a politician who wants to provoke a violent reaction. I even complimented the day after fitna the Muslim community by their reaction. I didn't make my movie for the Muslim community, I made it for the Dutch and Western community to show them what a danger the Islam is. And if they really wanted this discussion, 1 week after the presentation of fitna, I invited 6 imams to come to a public meeting with television, radio, everybody present to have a discussion with me about fitna. 3 moderate imams and 3 more radical imams. 5 of them said, no way, you have first have to apologize, we are not coming to debate with you. One of them even wants to take me to court today. So if they really would be able to have a discussion, I mean, they can criticize fitna, they can criticize the Muhammad cartoons, but they do not dare, and this is the soil of the problem, they do not dare to criticize their own terrible ideology and the terrible fascist book like Mein Kampf, which is called the Quran. They are not able to do that. And if they really would to integrate and assimilate in our society, they would come to my invitation to the debate and they would speak out their mind, and then we would have a discussion. They are weak and they are not afraid. They are afraid of doing that.
Interesting that you call the Quran Mein Kampf and you called for it to be banned from the Netherlands. You've also, in different ways, expressed an authoritarian streak. You want to see dual citizens who are convicted of a crime expelled without any judicial process to their country of origin.
With judicial process. Don't make it worse than it is, according to a lot of people. With judicial process.
You've said that you admire the administrative detention system in Israel. You want to see people in Holland locked up indefinitely, without trial. You have become an authoritarian, and yet you defend...
Also, that is not... Please, if you can say whatever you like, but please state the facts. Administrative detention is not without trial. Not in Israel, and not even how I propose it in the Netherlands.
What you're saying is that when you say you are the defender of traditional Dutch democracy, values of liberty and freedom, actually... that isn't quite true. You're defining a new Dutch value, which is based actually on authoritarianism.
No, I mean, this is a concept that even in Germany, you have the possibility for people that they lose their civil rights if they made some kind of crime. Even constitutional rights they can lose. And I believe it is strengthening the rule of law. It is strengthening our democratic society. If you would not allow a minority of persons to commit crimes and to kill everything that we stand for, you will strengthen the society.
What is the difference between you and the National Front in France or the neo-fascist movement, which is increasingly strong in Italy today?
The difference is that I'm not a racist or a xenophobe. I don't hate people. I have a problem with the ideology, the sick, cancerous ideology, Islam, and the dangerous prophet, the barber Muhammad. I believe this is very...
But you have a problem with many things that go beyond Islam. You have a problem with immigration. You have a major problem with immigration.
This is one of my solutions. But I don't...
No, hang on.
No, I'm not hanging on. I'm answering your question first. Your question was, what do you have in common with those guys? I'm saying I have nothing in common. The first reason I already gave you...
But that's patently not true. You have plenty in common.
No, the second is that, once again, I don't hate people. I have nothing against people who call themselves Muslim. I have something against their ideology. And I want to fight the ideology. And because I want to do that, I believe that we should stop the immigration. Indeed, we should have a full stop of immigration from Muslim countries. We should have a stop of building of mosques in the Netherlands. And maybe even more important, the young children at Islamic schools today in Europe and in the Netherlands that are filled in the head with an ideology of hate, ideology of intolerance, those schools